Let's talk about anxiety, scrupulosity, and sexuality.
Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast.
I'm Brannon.
I'm Tyler.
We're brothers.
We're therapists.
And we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Hey, Tyler, you ready to have some hard conversations?
Let's do it.
Let the Therapy Brothers podcast begin.
Brannon, these are all topics you love to hit, man.
Yeah. I've been dealing with them treating them for a long time, and they even have some personal stuff there. So maybe we'll get into that today a little bit. So
yeah, that'll be awesome.
Yeah.
But before we do that today, Brannon, we were just talking before we started the episode, and we've kind of made some plans for a possibility for a free pass to the upcoming Rising Sun retreat that's going to happen towards the end of September. I know it's a ways out, but we wanted to give people an opportunity to potentially come for free.
Yeah, and that's like some $2,000 value or something like that.
That's right.
And you know, this came to be because whenever we have guests on, you and I, after we stop recording, we're always like, we want to give them a chance to come to the retreat. And so we want to be able to comp somebody to come to the retreat for free this time. So it's really simple. The way that we're going to do this is whoever signs up to be a guest on our podcast, from now until, should we say my birthday?
Your birthday, which is the last day of July.
July 31st. Okay. So from now until July 31st, you don't have to have been on the show as a guest. You just need to have signed up to be on the show as a guest. So how do they go about signing up to be on the show, Tyler?
Yeah, basically go to therapybros.com. You can always submit a question. Just hit the button and submit a question in writing if you want. But if you sign up to become a caller on the show, that's the portion of the people that we're going to draw from on your birthday. So Brannon's birthday gift to himself will be giving away a pass to one person who has signed up to become a caller on the show. And the reason
Sounds like a great birthday.
It is a great birthday. And the reason we're doing this is because we so value the people who are courageous enough to put themselves out there and share themselves the way that they do with our audience. And we love getting to know new people, and we just really admire the courage that it takes to come on. So this is our way of saying, we see you, we appreciate you. And we always, like you said, Brannon, we're always telling people after we hang up the call with them, hey, you should come to the next retreat. But then we never actually give away a pass or anything. So this is our way of trying to do that.
Yeah, and it's all expenses paid. It's food, it's lodging, it's the therapeutic part, the experientials.
Everything except the travel.
Everything but the travel. So just get yourself there, and that's all you'll need to do. And we'll take care of the rest. Another thing too, Tyler, is for any women listening, if you come on and sign up, then you get a free pass to give away to somebody, a husband or brother, father, whomever,
whatever,
son. Yeah. And so feel free to sign up to be a guest as well. You can still win the pass. So. Okay, right. Tyler, you ready to roll? You ready to get into this?
Let's do it.
You said something to me earlier, and you said something about you treat the anxiety around sexuality almost more than you treat problematic sexual behaviors. Is that, I know you didn't say it that way, but
in essence, what I was saying is that I have a handful of clients at any given time on my caseload that will come through the door, and they come through the door because of, quote, a compulsive sexual, behavior of some sort. And then the more that I get to work with them, the more that I realize that the anxiety about their sexuality is actually bigger and more problematic in their life than whatever the form of acting out is that they had been doing. Or another way of saying that is that there's a certain handful of clients that often I see that don't necessarily have an addiction, but what they have is this really like almost scrupulous, obsessive judgment about everything that goes through them sexually, to the point that they can't function properly because their anxiety takes over all the time.
So you said that word scrupulous, which is a big word, and I think people are becoming more and more familiar with it. But just like, what is that? What is scrupulosity?
Yeah, scrupulosity is it's a rigid way of thinking. It's almost a form of OCD as it relates to spiritual kinds of things in most cases, or rules based kinds of things in most cases, or moral things in most cases. So basically, maybe I have a sexual thought go through my mind. And if I have struggle with scrupulosity, I instantly go to the place of that makes me a sinner. That means I'm not good enough. That means I need to start over my sobriety date. That means this. And they line themselves out in a way that they're constantly rigidly punishing themselves and judging themselves as being, in most cases, bad or unworthy or unlovable for something that is just a normal thing that happens for most people on any given day.
Scrupulosity, it's not always tied to sexuality, but it very much plays together. So what that means is, like what Tyler just said, it can just be an obsession with righteousness. But if there's a belief system that around sexuality where sex is looked at as sin, as shameful, as bad, then anything sexual that happens other than this prescribed thing that can happen, whether that's sex with a spouse or whatever, is looked at as sin. If you have that anxiety underneath going on, then you're constantly in a state of hyper arousal when it comes to, and I don't mean sexual arousal, hyper arousal when it comes to self rejection, and anxiety about whether or not you're okay with God. And if we can back up just a little bit, Tyler, I think there's a, I don't know if we call it an epidemic, but there's a problem on a much bigger scale around sex education and sexual development, sexuality, when it comes to the way that we are in our culture. And when I say our culture, I mean everything from being Americans to being Utahns to being members of a church to, like, it really can boil down, but there's a problem, and there's a big problem. And how it usually goes, and tell me if I'm wrong, is you're born, and even from the time you're born, sexuality is inside of you. It's there. You don't have to tell me this, Tyler, but I imagine you got your first erection at a pretty young age.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell you the age, but before I can remember, probably.
I can't remember. I mean, they were just there, right? Sexuality is inside of us. What happens is not much is taught at all about that early on in life. And then sometimes parents will talk more openly about it. Most of the time, parents will try to have a talk or just awkwardly try to discuss it or whatever. You go to school in 5th grade, you get the maturation program. And in the maturation program, they teach you a few things that kind of make you uncomfortable and squirm with all your classmates around, and it's a little awkward. And in adolescence, when you start in church, you start to be taught that you need to control things. You need to be careful. Don't lust. Don't masturbate. Don't act out with other people. And so there's a system that's put in place of don'ts, the things that you don't do, the things that you shouldn't do. And so there's a lack of healthy education about what sexuality is. And then there's an overabundance of what you shouldn't do with your sexuality. And when you put that combination together, it leads to self-rejection. It leads to sexuality is this carnal, evil, nasty, perverted thing that I must control in order to be okay with God. And with that train of thought, it leads to scrupulosity.
It's an interesting thing, Brannon, that the way you just painted that picture, I think there's a lot of people that would relate to a very similar type of training, so to speak. And and I look at like all of the factors that go into what you just described, and in most cases, you look at there's a couple of things like themes here that I think are important. One is that sex from a very early age is a taboo thing.
Yeah.
It's something that already feels weird, even if it's being talked about in like a normal way or like the maturation class kind of a way, because it's a bunch of fifth graders and they're all kind of feeling a little, and most of them haven't had conversations with their parents. It becomes this like taboo thing, right? So that already makes it feel weird. And then it feels rigid, and it's often closed off in the way that it's discussed into the things of the do's and the don'ts.
Yeah.
So how many times do you go to like, a church activity or something else, and it's like, here's what's okay and here's what's not, and that instantly is already fueling the possibility of this idea of scrupulosity, rather than what about all the principles behind the do's and the don'ts. And those are harder because those are ongoing discussions that we should be having with our children and in our society, and they don't get had. And then here's what happens, Brannon, is that you have the rigidness of now, I'm bad. I have sexual thoughts. I have sexual feelings. I've been taught these things in, quote, doctrinal ways that I shouldn't do this or I should do that. And so all of a sudden I'm wrapped up in my anxiety. And then the other part of the recipe that you didn't include yet is there's this other extreme end, which is like, well, we'll teach you everything, and here's the porn world that's like, there are no bounds. There is no, like, come over here. And so if I go and test the waters there, sometimes I get so far off the other edge that I do actually feel some of my conscience kick in. But now I'm thinking it's all of my sexuality, and then I can have to continue to keep secrets and hide. And what I think is missing is the middle ground between the two.
Well, I think, we've had this discussion many times, and I think, sure, like that's a problem. I don't think that lends to scrupulosity. I think what lends to scrupulosity is the rigidity, is the shoulds and the shame and the don'ts, where the chaotic side of things, where just go do whatever, that leads to all kinds of other stuff. That leads to promiscuity. It leads to all kinds of stuff, right? That problems that affect mental health in other ways.
I think what I'm getting at though is that for a lot of our clients, because there was no place to actually explore their sexuality or have discussions about it or come to a self-acceptance on it, by the time they get to our office, they've stepped over into the other realm and they've engaged in certain things that actually are against their morals and their values. But now they've taken that piece of the one behavior they did by stepping outside of their morals and values, and then they attach it, they double back down on that rigidity, and they go, oh, that means everything that I've thought or I've felt makes me bad, makes me not good enough, makes me like, and then that anxiety amps up, and the more the anxiety amps up, it causes all sorts of damage in their lives.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. The lethal combination is the two, is like, I'm scrupulous about my sexuality, but I get to the point of secrecy and shame or whatever, where I get the F-its. I go do whatever. In fact, I get more of a dopamine rush and a hit because it is so scandalous and so sinful and so shameful, that it's more enticing to go do. And then I go do those things, and then what do? I turn around and I condemn myself. I beat myself up, shame myself, and that combination.
Even for things that would be normal within the realm of healthy sexuality.
Right. So on one hand, I'm condemning myself for normal, healthy sexuality. On the other hand, I'm acting out in extreme ways that are not healthy for me. So I see what you're saying, Tyler.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the two extremes, and what's crazy is within one person, the two extremes can exist at the same time. And when you talk about that middle ground, what is that? Like, what is, if we're saying that the way that we were socialized and educated and taught about sex, it hasn't been the healthiest, what is healthy?
Yeah, it's well, and I think that's the challenge is we have to be comfortable enough with our own sexuality to then have open discussions about whatever's going on with our own sexuality. You
Right.
know, I remember I remember this. I tell this story. I, we were out with some friends and we were like shopping at the mall or something. This was a long time ago, and my friend had like four little boys. I have my four little girls. We're going through the store and we go into like Old Navy or something, and he goes in the room to try something on, and he takes his oldest boy with him, and I'm kind of standing outside the dressing room just kind of waiting for my wife and other people to change, try clothes on and stuff, and all of a sudden I hear I hear this his oldest boy who's probably like 5 or 6 at the time. He's like, "Dad, I want to see your penis." And, and all of a sudden I just see this kid getting dragged out of Old Navy. Like my friend's just got like this beet red face and just dragging his kid out of the store just like as fast as he can get out of there because he's so embarrassed and so ashamed. And it's like and I'm like, that kid didn't really do anything wrong.
No.
No, it was like this is the same kid who came over to me one time when he was about the same age. I was changing my daughter's diaper. We were over to their house and whatever. I'm changing my daughter's diaper. She's a little baby. He comes over and he's like, "Oh no, oh yeah." They were changing his little brother's diaper, and he comes over and he's like, "My dad has one of those," and he's like, "But it's bigger than yours." But all he is doing is just like he's just this kid who's just like, yeah,
And he wasn't wrong.
no, probably I'm sure he was right, you know. No, but like this is a kid. Think about it. He's a 5, 6 year old kid, and what's he already learning inside of that experience? Where all of a sudden he's like, it's like he's like just in his normal living pattern, like a fish in water, and all of a sudden he's like yanked out of the water. Like, what did I do wrong? Like, all I said is I want to see your penis. Like that's what a little kid like. That's and all of a sudden he's just like in trouble, and there's a message that's being sent, and of course that's an embarrassing thing, and that's kind of a funny story, right? But can we be comfortable enough in our skin to actually be like, address that in a different way that doesn't have such a knee-jerk reaction?
Yeah. Yeah. That's an opportunity for
Right.
education. And I think when there's, you talk about that tabooness, I think it's important to talk about the energy behind that and what that conveys to people, to us. So yeah, it's taboo, but what's that teaching to a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old that's so sensitive to like what's actually going on energetically? Oh, this is weird. This is wrong. This is not okay. And so yeah, your friend's son says that and he gets dragged out of the store. Instant, that's like not okay. Um, and so what's crazy, Tyler, is it's not okay. It's taboo. It's not okay. It's taboo. But hey, here's like a phone when you're, now it's like 6 years old. here's a here's a phone when you're 12 or whatever, and oh yeah, it has just porn everywhere on it. So it's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. But just 2 clicks away, it's everywhere, and it's there, and it's all over the place. So what is it? What is it like? This is unfair. It's let's go one way or the other with it, right? But when the message is that it needs to be covert, it needs to be hidden.
That's the part that's the part that fuels the shame and the secrecy, and then the anxiety gets really big too.
Well, and then you throw on that God's eyes are on you, watching you closely about every little sin that you make or don't make or whatever. So we teach covertness, we teach secrecy when it comes to sexuality, and then we teach that you're condemned for your sexuality, which just leads to living in a state of either depression, shut down, I'm just a horrible whatever, or anxiety. I got to control this. I got to make sure I'm okay. I got to make sure I'm not a sinner. And both sides, both of those things are not okay outcomes. We need to go one. Actually, we don't need to go one way or the other. We need a whole different system, a whole different way of doing things when it comes to healthy sexuality.
That's right. And I think we could come up with some principles about what would be the right principles inside of that system.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I've told this story before, the Titanic story. Do you know that one?
I don't know that I remember that the Titanic
Me,
story.
me, and it was like me and my buddies. We just graduated high school. Everybody was getting their mission calls, and we decided to go to a movie together. And so like a bunch of dudes, we go to Titanic. We had no idea like what Titanic was really. We were just oblivious.
It was the big movie out at the
It
time.
was the big movie, you know? And so the theater was full. So we got the front row and we took up the whole front row. There's probably 13, 14 of us. And half the guys had their mission calls and we're watching Titanic. And sure enough, there's that scene in Titanic where she's completely topless. And I was on the end of the row and I'm watching the movie and I look down and all of the dudes' eyes are just like, these are dudes who hadn't seen much pornography or boobs or anything like that. Like all of them were like fixated on the screen, right? Just like mesmerized.
Whoa.
Like, holy cow, it was, yeah. And so immediately we get out of the movie, and I remember we were sitting at like a McDonald's or something, and they started a discussion where it's like, that part was so despicable. That was a good movie, except it was ruined because of that part. And I'm listening to them and I'm thinking like, okay, you all hate that part, yet you all loved it. Like you're all acting as if you're so righteous, yet deep down, like you actually really enjoyed that, right? And so there's a problem here.
Yeah, well, I think part of the problem is, Brannon, in the discussion is that in order to look righteous, there had to be the criticism and the disgust rather than the open discussion about, man, I wish they wouldn't have included that part. That made me feel this or this or this.
But also, and I think this is the hard part to say, was like, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, a part of me liked that.
I'm a 19-year-old boy. And I, yeah, that part I really enjoyed. I wish they would have left it out. I don't think it was something I wanted to see right now, but yeah, I did enjoy that part.
Yeah.
Right. None of them were going to say that. But why is that important to say, Tyler?
I think it's because it's honest,
It normalizes it a little bit, and
it's honest, and it's like, in a certain sense, this kind of boils into some of the principles that I think we could get to, and one of them is self-compassion. And self-compassion, a big part of self-compassion is something called common humanity, which is just acknowledging that whatever is that I'm experiencing happens to fall within the realm of the human condition.
Tyler, you know how I think of. We talk a lot about when it comes to being boys, right? Like men. But I just think of women in terms of what you just said with self-compassion and the human condition. Women are so confused when it comes to sexuality. Pleasure, good girl syndrome comes up. If I have pleasure, that's bad. I shouldn't focus on my own pleasure. I shouldn't.
It's about my husband.
It's about my husband. It's not okay. Like sexuality is dirty and yucky and wrong for me. And I shouldn't be a sexual being as a woman. And so why am I having these feelings? Why are these things coming up for me? And it's so just misconstrued and off in terms of what women are taught about sexuality as well. And when we come back to it's normal, let's have compassion for the human condition. Or I'd like to take it a step further. Let's celebrate how beautiful and miraculous our bodies are and what they can do in terms of our creative powers. Like sex is the opposite of just sin in my eyes. Sex is one of the most godlike things that we get to participate in while we're here on this earth. And to go that far with it, almost is like, where's the lightning? Is that blasphemous? Is that okay to say? But it's absolutely important to say, and I think it needs to be talked about more.
It's an interesting thing, and I don't know if this will be something that everybody can kind of run through their own systems a little bit. But I look at all the way from the beginning of the plan in a Christian perspective that Adam and Eve were basically given really two things when they were placed in this garden, and the two things that they were given was don't partake of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? Basically, the ability to choose and the ability to gain knowledge from that choice. And then the second thing that they were taught was multiply and replenish the earth. So it was actually a God-given mandate even before they knew what they were doing.
But in the midst
to have
of that
sexual expression.
In the midst of that, Tyler, Satan's coming in saying, "But you're naked, hide."
Well, and what's interesting to me is in both of those things, if you look at that, don't partake of the tree that will actually give you experience and help you to learn and grow through your choices, and multiply and replenish the earth.
Yep.
Both of those things by nature have a deep level of vulnerability. And the adversary in the story steps in and twists that vulnerability and turns it into shame.
Yes.
And that's where I think we've maybe gone wrong a little bit is that we've misconstrued trying to have healthy boundaries to make those things good into the do's and don'ts. And then we focus on the don'ts. And then we've tied the don'ts to sin, and sin turns into you're bad.
Yes.
Instead of, wow, I need to go figure this out, do some learning and growing, approach it from a growth mindset, figure out what is actually healthy for me, because there's great power in both of those things, the ability to make your own choices and have experience, and our sexuality. There's power there.
Absolutely.
And that power then comes with its own form of, needing to use it responsibly. But the way you get there is through being able to be open about it and practice it and learn through it rather than shut it down.
There's it's almost like a foreign concept that a lot of people have, or a lot of us have, which is, okay, if I remove the shame from my sexuality, yikes, then I'll just go nuts. Like I won't have any control. And the foreign concept is, if I remove the shame from my sexuality, I actually step into more power and into more healthy control in my life. Because now I'm operating from a place of honesty, of understanding of self, of self-compassion. And so I don't need shame to be there to protect me from myself. And we can remove Satan and the "you're naked, hide" part of this, and the two can exist together, like you just said, Tyler. But it's scary. If you've been under these systems of anxiety, people get addicted to their anxiety. They have a hard time putting that away because it's what they feel like protects them.
Right. And the reason why is because they have been burned in the past, or they burned themselves in the past. And I think it goes all the way back to what you're saying, Brannon. This really boils down to, what kind of a person do you think you are? Are you a person who is a living, breathing human being who's a miracle, who happens to make mistakes once in a while and can learn from them? Or are you a person who can't be trusted because at the core you're bad? And the first one allows for honesty. It allows for growth. It allows for choice. It allows for, curiosity. And all of that leads to an authentic understanding of self, which then leads to good health. And the second one is the thing that we think is protecting us, but it's actually fueling the very thing with shame and loss of identity that then leads to further disconnection from everything: God, others, even self, heart and mind.
Yes, right. And when you have that disconnection, it's interesting because what's there to soothe you? That covert behavior that numbs it all out. And then the cycle goes on and on and on. right? Versus living an open, honest, authentic life with connection, knowing you're going to make some mistakes. Some things might be mistakes, and some things might just be learning and growing and development. Um, but like knowing that that's coming, that's part of this. Being able to stay an open, honest person even through those things, and then you learn who you actually are, versus trying to become what you should be. And everything always comes back to growth mindset. Um, if I'm in a state of growth mindset when it comes to sexuality, then I get to learn and grow. If I'm in a fixed mindset with all of the shoulds and the do's and the don'ts, then I get to create suffering in my life.
Yeah, and I think the suffering then spills over oftentimes into the lives of others too. Like give an example of this, have a guy who maybe is trying to work his recovery, but he's so wrapped up in making sure that he's still seen as a good person, and he wants to make sure he never has his wife be mad at him again or whatever. They go out into public, and let's say they go hit the beach, and then he's walking around going like, I didn't see any women, I didn't see any bathing suits. What? Like I didn't see like, number one, that's not honest. Number two, if he's doing that to manipulate her feelings, she also knows that he's not being honest. So it actually betrays the trust of the relationship. And there is no room in the relationship now for honest, open discussion of, hey, this is me. This is me. This is what I'm okay with. This is what I'm not okay with. And it could actually lead to a space of letting the work be the work rather than I'm going to close it all up and pretend it's not there, and then none of the work happens on either side.
Right. Because that leads to disconnection.
Yeah. And then of course there's less trust. And then he's like, but I'm not doing anything wrong.
But I think the alternative is scary, is if we get away from all the do's and the don'ts and the shoulds and the shame, then the alternative is honesty and openness. And if somebody says something honest and open that scares us, like if we always use the beach. This example we use all the time. My wife's walking down the beach, and she says, "Well, I noticed that guy. That guy's hot." Can I handle that? Can I be a safe person for her to still be honest back with her about what my boundaries are and who I am, but still be safe for her to be open and honest with me? And that's kind of the sweet spot that exists in a relationship. If I can be open and honest and share things with you, you're not going to get so triggered that you shut me down in fear and control, but you're going to be honest with me about who you are and what works for you and what doesn't. And that's the good spot.
You said something there that I think a lot of people have a very difficult time with finding, and they often feel like pure acceptance and honesty is the opposite of the boundaries, when in reality, finding the sweet spot is acceptance of the reality and then having the boundaries operate inside of that reality.
Yeah, that's well put, Tyler. Because if you have that creates intimacy. So a couple can definitely resonate in anxiety together around sexuality and shame. Like they can
They'll
do
fuel
this
each other.
They'll fuel even the scrupulous behaviors and thoughts. Or a couple can be each other's biggest asset to not do that, and to feel safe, to feel like I'm loved, even if I'm open about who I really am. And if I am, and we have this relationship, then we can keep our fidelity intact, and we can still be open and honest and empowered with who we actually are. And that's where love is. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's just, when there's been water under the bridge that's been painful, we all kind of have a tendency to want to go to an extreme place because that seems to promise the best outcome.
Right.
And so it's hard to lean back into the middle. And that's why learning to trust self, learning to live in reality, and then learning to set boundaries and make choices accordingly for the sake of good health, not for the sake of being a good person. Like, like if I'm doing it because it's effective, not because it'll make me a good boy. I think that's a big part of this process too.
I think you bring up, and maybe to wrap this up, overcoming this ultimately comes down to understanding our innate goodness. Like if I know that God loves me unconditionally and that I'm good, then I'm not trying all the time to prove myself to God in order to be okay to God, in order to earn God's favor or love or whatever. I don't need to earn it. It's already there. Now, that doesn't mean I can just go do whatever I want. Well, it does mean I can go do whatever I want and I'm still loved, right?
Yeah.
But do I want those consequences in my life? Then I get to operate from a place of power where I'm choosing what consequences do I want or not in my life. But I know God loves me. I know that's there no matter what. And so if you have that understanding, then you're not going to be in that anxiety.
And the interesting thing about that is that the more someone comes to understand and fully know and accept that they're loved no matter what, love is the greatest motivator towards good health. So we're less likely to actually go and blow our lives apart with some random scary sexual behavior, because we're now in reality, we know we're loved, and because we know we're loved, we make choices that prove that right.
Yeah. Yes. And that's recovery right there. And a lot of times it's taught that the anxiety is recovery, and that it's like, well, if you force yourself and you white knuckle, and that's recovery. That's not recovery. Recovery is what Tyler just said. So, Tyler, thank you for this discussion. It's been good today.
You bet. To our listeners, I'm sure there's some things churning inside of you, maybe a few open-ended questions. If you have questions, come on the show. Come talk to us. We'd love to have you on. And until next time, you guys, keep on keeping on.